Hey, good morning. Patricia Murphy here. It's Saturday. This is Seattle Now. Today, we're bringing you the best from the KUOW Newsroom. We'll start with a local anniversary. The Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center celebrated its 50th yesterday. Gabriel Spitzer reports that over that time, the Hutch has evolved from a scrappy lab doing what some considered risky science into one of the top cancer centers in the world. Here's Gabe.
Some of the earliest work at what would become the Fred Hutch Cancer Center took place in the 1970s underground, down 3 flights of fluorescent-lit stairs.
It was an old naval communication bunker from World War II.
Reiner Storb was part of that first tiny team testing radiation treatment on dogs.
There was a treatment room, and there was a separate room with total body irradiation sources. The rest of it was abandoned old radio equipment.
The researchers, led by an oncologist named Don Thomas, were betting that they could treat leukemia not with chemotherapy or surgery, but with a bone marrow transplant. The first efforts in humans were not encouraging.
The early attempts were grim. They all failed. There were something like 200 published cases, all of whom died.
Progress was halting, but steady. One patient survived, then more, and now the 1-year survival rate at Fred Hutch is over 80%. Meanwhile, a guy named Dr. Bill Hutchinson was dealing with a loss of his own. His brother Fred had died of lung cancer. Bill helped create the Cancer Center in his honor. He folded in Storb's team and others and launched what amounted to a startup.
I remember very distinctly when it was started, some of the most original scientists in the country were signing up.
Harold Varmus is a former director of both the NIH and the National Cancer Institute. He's watched Fred Hutch from afar all along and says it was always known for taking big swings.
I always felt that it was one of the more original, forward-looking, modern cancer centers, not simply doing a lot of clinical trials, but trying to understand the essence of cancer, a place that was trying to make discoveries.
It's my pleasure to introduce the 2 Nobel laureates, Dr. Joseph Murray and Dr. Donald Thomas.
In 1991, Don Thomas got the Nobel Prize for finally cracking the bone marrow transplant puzzle.
It takes a long time to accomplish these objectives. We mustn't be too impatient, but clearly great progress has been made. Thank you.
The Nobel put Fred Hutch on the map, and it got the attention of a young Thomas Lynch, who's now the center's president.
I learned about Fred Hutch when I was a kid because my father was a hematologist, and he told me the Fred Hutch in Seattle, he said they're doing something called bone marrow transplant. And I had never heard of bone marrow transplant. I was 12 years old, 13 years old. And he said it's high risk, but they're able to cure children and young adults with leukemia, which was just unbelievable.
That groundbreaking work set the stage for advances in transplantation, immunotherapy, and precision medicine. And beyond cancer, Fred Hutch has become a major player in HIV research and public health. Lynch credits the ethos of a place that began like a startup and has always been willing to take risks.
Seattle is a center of innovation. And if you look at the growth of Microsoft and Amazon and Starbucks and Costco, it's not crazy to think that that same cauldron of innovation would have launched the Fred Hutch.
Fred Hutch has gone from fewer than 300 employees to more than 6,000 and racked up 3 Nobel Prizes. That doesn't come cheap, and now it's facing a harsh financial outlook. The Trump administration's cuts to science and health funding have hit Fred Hutch hard. Earlier this year, they announced layoffs of IT workers and HIV researchers. But Director Tom Lynch says in the long run, Fred Hutch will be able to get by.
I think the Hutch is well positioned because our science is supported both by the government and by foundations and by the people in Seattle. And that philanthropy goes directly to supporting research and patient care.
Fred Hutch marked its 50th birthday with a big fundraising campaign, as well as a big party. Gabriel Spitzer, KUOW News.
Now, a story about local community college enrollment. International students have brought needed revenue to colleges in recent years, especially community colleges, where local enrollment has fallen. But getting permission to study in the U.S. has gotten harder under the Trump administration. As Ann Dornfeld reports, Seattle area community colleges have been hit hard by the changes and the fear they've caused.
Bellevue College enrolls more international students than any other community college statewide. more than 1,000 last year.
It's a very difficult time for international students.
Jean-Darc Campbell leads the school's international program. He says a lot of students are having trouble getting visa appointments because they were put on pause for weeks this summer. The Trump administration has revoked about 6,000 student visas nationwide this year. Campbell says that makes students and their families nervous.
To study abroad is a choice that you have to make with the blessing of your parent. And for many parents to read in the news and to hear what is happening in America is creating that sense of panic.
International students at community colleges can often be more vulnerable to travel restrictions because they draw from different countries than four-year schools. At the University of Washington, most students are from China and India. At Bellevue College, Congolese students were the largest group last year. In June, President Trump banned travel to the U.S. from 12 countries he deemed security risks, including the Republic of Congo. Many Bellevue students are from the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo, which the Trump administration has listed as a country that might be added to the ban. Same with Kyrgyzstan, home to many Bellevue students.
They wonder what comes next, because every day there is something new. And of course, the question is, what is going to happen? Is my country the next target?
With the start of school at Bellevue College weeks away, new international student enrollment is down 56%. Other colleges are also seeing big dips. At Shoreline Community College, international admissions are down 26% this fall. Of the nation's 20 community colleges with the largest international populations, 1/4 are in the Seattle area, including Green River, Edmonds, and Seattle Central. Those schools enrolled twice as many international students last year as they did 2 decades ago. Professor Nick Huntington Klein says recruiting students from abroad has helped community colleges stay afloat. He teaches economics at Seattle University and has studied how students make college decisions. Huntington Klein says community colleges have had a tough decade, and local enrollment is way down. Demographic shifts have meant fewer people of college age, he says, and they now have more choices.
There's more for-profits. There's more people going into non-college approaches. There's more four-year colleges that are being less selective. So, there's definitely some real structural pressures on community colleges to find those students, and introducing more international students has been one of the fixes.
International students pay higher tuition than in-state students, and state funding is based on enrollment. Huntington Klein says community colleges are vulnerable to swings in enrollment because they don't receive the same research funding as four-year schools.
Adding international students, I think, has turned out to be a risk that was not foreseen as a risk, right? If you go back even to the first Trump administration, there was not a major fear that international students were just going to start getting turned away, whereas that is much more of a fear now.
At Bellevue College, Jean-Darc Campbell says it's hard to counsel students when the rules and situation are so fluid. He says the school is working with international students who are still trying to get to campus this fall, and those who are already in the country but worried about what's to come. He knows that sense of unease. He's Congolese and was a refugee before he came to the U.S.
It's not easy, but we are still hoping for the best. I was an international student. I went through all this process, but I believe in that spirit of America that sometimes help people overcome challenges.
As with other colleges, Bellevue won't know for sure how federal pressure has affected who comes to school this fall until classes begin later this month. Ann Dornfeld, KUOW News.
And finally, another important anniversary this week. September 2nd marked 80 years since the end of World War II. Northwest Public Broadcasting's Rachel Sun spoke with veterans, families, and a historian working to preserve personal memories of the Second World War. Here's Rachel.
I'm in an assisted care home with 96-year-old Beverly Dahman, her daughter Carol, and son Pat. Dahman is sitting in her bed telling me about her older brother, Noel Plowman.
Yeah, I guess to start off with, do you want just telling me about him and what he was like?
Well, he was a wonderful young man. He was very successful in high school in sports.
Plowman played football, basketball, and baseball all 4 years. He was a charmer, too.
A lot of girls crazy about him.
Yeah.
And he always had a girl.
Plowman was funny, she says. He was always cracking jokes, and when he came home from college...
The place was just fun. He was that kind of a guy.
Despite growing up poor, Daman says her brother had big aspirations. Growing up in the little town of La Crosse, Washington, he'd work harvest during the summer to save up for college. When he got to Washington State College in 1941, now Washington State University, he won an academic scholarship. But on December 7th of that year, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. That prompted the United States to enter World War II. Instead of waiting to be drafted, Plowman enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps in 1942. He was just 20 years old.
Well, he knew he didn't want to be in the Army or the Navy or Marines, so he wanted to be in the Air Force, and he wanted to fly.
From June to September of 1944, Plowman piloted a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber on missions in Normandy and northern France. On September 25th, he was assigned a mission intended to target railroad marshalling yards in Frankfurt, Germany. But his plane never returned. For roughly a year, Noel Plowman was listed as missing in action. Daman was a young teenager and the only child still living at home. She says her parents fell into a deep depression.
My parents suffered. At 14, I didn't know how to handle that kind of stuff to help them get over it. I didn't want to be at home and see it, but I was.
It was a year later when the family received the official news. Daman's brother had been killed in action. Daman grew up and had her own family, but 80 years later, she still thinks about her brother.
Because you don't talk about it with anybody after this length of time, but you think about it, you know. What would it be like if Noel was here and married and had a family?
Alicia Callahan is a historian based in Stanwood, Washington. She specializes in World War II history. Callahan says humanizing wars is an essential part of understanding them.
I think the first step in understanding war for what it is to kind of encourage students to take a step back and understand that those battles couldn't have been fought or even won or lost without each individual that was there.
But getting those stories is hard. Even among those who did make it back, many never talked to their families about the war. Since 2022, Callahan has interviewed roughly 45 World War II veterans about their lives and war experiences.
It took a lot of time for them to process what they experienced and what they endured. And I've been so blessed that I've gotten to catch them at that point in their life where they are comfortable sharing.
She says depictions of heroic battles and World War II's success stories are a foundational part of American identity. But, Callahan says, the other stories, the battles that were lost, the realities of warfare, are sometimes overlooked.
I think that is a big reason the men struggled coming forward, because popular media, public memory really just zeroed in on the successes of World War II, and that wasn't the case. A lot of them died because leadership made mistakes. A lot of them made mistakes.
Many World War II veterans described how, as young men, they lacked an understanding of what war entailed. Veterans told Callahan they enlisted because that's what everyone else was doing, or because they wanted to be like men they saw in movies, or because they wanted to fly an airplane.
It really kind of goes against what we would think of. They only enlisted because they wanted to get even with the Nazis. And of course they did. It played a role in it, but it's not the main thing that they acknowledge.
Wally King served as a first lieutenant in the Air Corps. He spoke with Callahan in an interview last year.
Yeah, I think it's parades and fancy uniforms and medals and you name it, but you can't glorify war. It's a dirty, evil, mean business.
Army Sergeant George Reitmeyer survived the sinking of his ship, the SS Leopoldville. But he told Callahan his worst experience of the war was seeing a young girl begging for food at a displaced persons camp in Linz, Austria.
It was cold, and all she had on was a dress or something like it, and no shoes. She had just some rags wrapped around her feet and tied with a string.
Reitmeyer recalled how after the first time he gave the girl food, he would often find her waiting for him.
I started taking a little bit extra that I could give away and put in her pot so she'd have a little bit more to eat.
Reitmeyer described civilians who arrived at the camp with nothing but the clothes on their back.
That to me was a real part of the hell of war. Seeing those innocent people suffer for months after the shooting stopped.
Callahan says one of the biggest takeaways for many of the veterans had to do with the way they viewed their enemy. One veteran she interviewed was just 18 years old when he served during the Battle of Okinawa. He told Callahan that for decades after the war, he hated Japanese people. But during a layover in Japan in the 1980s, he met a group of young school children who approached him to practice their English.
And he said, I probably fought their dads and their grandpas during World War II, and I thought they were the devils. But if they can raise such precious, amazing children, they must not be so bad after all.
In their later years, many veterans said they grew to see those they fought in a different light, other young men who had been trying to survive.
Once again, that old tale of old men sending young men to war. They had the blessing of growing older and getting to understand that a bit more.
Callahan says talking about all the realities of war can be complicated, but those realities shouldn't be forgotten. According to the National World War II Museum, there are over 45,000 surviving World War II veterans in the United States and U.S. territories, less than 0.5% of the 16.4 million who served. I'm Rachel Sun, reporting.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Our production team includes Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.